There's a certain kind of wealthy that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear a logo you can read from across the street. It doesn't drive the newest thing. It doesn't post its vacations. It whispers in the cut of a collar, the grain of a leather briefcase, the quiet confidence of someone who has never once flinched at a bill. This is what people call old money, and for the last decade, the world has been obsessed with it. The aesthetic is everywhere. Pinterest boards, TikTok trends, quiet luxury, stealth wealth, influencers in the Hamptons with $4 iced coffees and $6,000 linen trousers. The message is seductive. Real wealth doesn't try. Real wealth simply is. But here's what nobody talks about. That effortless look, it's exhausting to maintain. And more importantly, it is ruinously expensive in ways that are almost never discussed. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the true hidden cost of performing old money. Not just the clothes, not just the address. We're talking about the psychological cost, the social cost, the opportunity cost, and the raw financial arithmetic of pretending, or even being, old money in the 21st century. This is going to surprise you. What is old money actually? Before we talk about cost, we need to agree on what we're actually talking about. Old money is one of those terms that everyone uses and almost no one can precisely define. So let's be exact. Sociologically, old money refers to inherited wealth, fortunes accumulated over multiple generations, typically before the mid-20th century. In the American context, this means the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the Astors, the DuPonts. In Europe, it means aristocratic families, landed gentry, and centuries-old merchant dynasties. In other parts of the world, West Africa's elite trading families, India's business dynasties like the Tatas, Brazil's coffee barons, the concept exists too, though the aesthetic markers differ. What defines old money isn't just how much money you have. It's the relationship you have with that money. Old money is comfortable with wealth in a way that new money often isn't. It doesn't need to perform. It doesn't need validation. It has had generations to develop the manners, the vocabulary, the tastes, and the social connections that signal membership in a certain class. The sociologist Thorstein Veblen wrote about this in 1899 in his landmark book, The Theory of the Leisure Class. He coined the phrase conspicuous consumption, the idea that the wealthy display their status through visible spending. But old money operates differently. It practices what later sociologists would call inconspicuous consumption, the deliberate suppression of obvious wealth signals in favor of subtle, coded ones. A new money millionaire buys a Ferrari. An old money family drives a 12-year-old Range Rover because they've never needed to prove anything to anyone. But, and this is the central irony of today's video, that non-performance is itself an incredibly expensive performance to pull off. The sociologist Pierre Bourdieu gave us the language for this. He talked about 3 types of capital: economic capital, money; social capital, networks and relationships; and cultural capital, knowledge, taste, and behavioral fluency. Old money is distinguished not by its economic capital alone, but by the depth of its cultural and social capital. And cultural capital, it turns out, is one of the most expensive things in the world to acquire and maintain. Here's where it gets really interesting. In the last 10 years, a massive new market has emerged. People who want to look like old money without being old money. This quiet luxury aesthetic, championed by shows like Succession, by brands like Loro Piana, Brunello Cucinelli, and Ralph Lauren Purple Label, has created an entire industry built around performing inherited class. And that performance has a price tag that would make your eyes water. Let's break it down. The wardrobe, where it starts and never stops. Timestamp 7 o'clock to 14 o'clock. The first and most visible layer of the old money aesthetic is clothing. And this is where most people make their first and most expensive mistake. The old money wardrobe operates on a philosophy that sounds economical but isn't. Buy less, buy better, buy forever. The idea is that rather than spending $50 on a shirt every season, you spend $500 on one that lasts 20 years. Rather than chasing trends, you build what stylists call a capsule wardrobe, a small collection of timeless, perfectly fitted, high-quality pieces. Sounds sensible. Let's look at what it actually costs. A single bespoke suit from a reputable British tailor, Huntsman, Anderson and Shepherd, or Henry Poole on Savile Row, runs between $5,000 and $15,000. And that's just one suit. The old money wardrobe requires at minimum 3 to 5 suits in rotation. That's $15,000 to $75,000 in suits alone, before you've touched shirts, shoes, or accessories. Hand-stitched Oxford shoes from Crockett & Jones or John Lobb, $600 to $4,000 per pair. You need at least 4 pairs for a proper rotation, because leather shoes must rest between wearings to maintain their shape. A cashmere sweater from a heritage brand like N. Peel or Johnston's of Elgin, $400 to $1,200. A single cashmere coat, $3,000 to $8,000. And none of this accounts for maintenance, which is itself an ongoing and often ignored cost. Bespoke clothing requires professional care, not the dry cleaner on your corner, a specialist. Tailors must be visited regularly for adjustments as bodies change. Shoes must be resoled, reheeled, and polished with proper products. Cashmere must be stored with cedar to prevent moth damage and professionally cleaned. The American fashion research firm NPD Group estimated that Americans who aspire to the luxury wardrobe category, not the top-tier buyers, just the aspirants, spend on average $4,000 to $8,000 per year on clothing and accessories maintenance alone. Now here's the irony. True old money families rarely spend this much because they already have the wardrobe. Grandmother's pearls, grandfather's cufflinks, a tweed jacket bought in 1978 that still fits because the body that bought it never changed dramatically. The old money wardrobe is one that has been accumulated over time, not purchased all at once. When someone new to the aesthetic tries to replicate it wholesale, they're compressing generations of accumulation into a single shopping spree. That compression is extraordinarily expensive. And then there's the question of taste. The old money aesthetic is almost militantly subtle. No visible logos, nothing that screams a brand. The insider knowledge required to understand why a certain pair of loafers or a specific watch represents quality. That knowledge is itself a form of cultural capital that takes years to develop. This creates a trap. Newcomers to the aesthetic often overcorrect, buying things that are expensive but slightly wrong. The collar too stiff, the lapel too wide, the shoes slightly too shiny. To an old money eye, these errors are immediately legible. You've spent the money, but betrayed the lack of experience. Bourdieu called this cultural misrecognition, and it is one of the most painful and expensive pitfalls of aspiring to a class you were not born into. The address, the most expensive signal of all. If clothing is the first layer of the old money signal, geography is the second, and it's far more expensive. Where you live is not just shelter, In the old money world, it is a social credential, and the right addresses come at prices that have become, in many cities, genuinely stratospheric. Let's look at the numbers. In New York City, the old money neighborhoods are well defined. The Upper East Side, particularly between 61st and 86th Street, Park Avenue to Fifth Avenue, parts of the Upper West Side, and certain pockets of Brooklyn, like Brooklyn Heights. A two-bedroom co-op apartment on Park Avenue, the kind with a doorman, white glove service, and a board that will scrutinize your financials more aggressively than any bank. Costs between $3 million and $10 million. Monthly maintenance fees on many of these buildings run $5,000 to $15,000, not including property taxes. In London, the equivalent postcodes are SW1, Belgravia Knightsbridge, W8, Kensington, and parts of Chelsea. A mid-sized townhouse in Belgravia, the kind with a white stucco facade and a private garden, is £8 million to £25 million. Annual running costs on such a property, including staff, maintenance, and taxes, can exceed £200,000 per year. In Paris, it's the 7th arrondissement, Rue de Grenelle, Avenue Montaigne, the streets around the Musée d'Orsay. A 200-square-meter apartment there lists for €3 million to €12 million. But here's what's genuinely shocking. In many of these buildings and neighborhoods, simply being able to afford the purchase price is not sufficient. The old money world has developed extraordinary gatekeeping mechanisms to ensure that money alone cannot buy admission. New York's most prestigious co-op buildings are famous for this. The Dakota on 72nd Street and Central Park West, 740 Park Avenue, 834 Fifth Avenue. These buildings have boards that have rejected billionaires. Richard Nixon was reportedly rejected by a building on Fifth Avenue. Cher was turned down. Barbra Streisand. The reasoning given is always vague, not the right fit, but the subtext is clear. New money, no matter how abundant, is not old money. These buildings require applicants to submit letters of reference from existing residents. They scrutinize liquid assets, not just income. They look at how wealth was made. They evaluate, there is no polite way to say this, who the applicant is in a social and cultural sense. This is gatekeeping as an art form. And if you somehow get past the building board, the neighborhood itself imposes ongoing costs. The expectation to donate to the right charities, to belong to the right clubs, to send children to the right schools. More on that shortly. But there's another subtler dimension to the address question that nobody talks about: the country home. Old money in the Anglo-American tradition almost always includes a secondary property: the weekend house, the country estate, the summer compound. The Hamptons for New York, the Cotswolds for London, Martha's Vineyard for Boston, Cape Cod for the Old Wasp establishment. These properties are not optional in old money social culture. They are where the real socializing happens, where relationships are cemented, where the next generation absorbs the norms of the class through sheer proximity. A modest house in the Hamptons, and modest is doing a lot of work there, costs $3 million to $8 million. Something appropriate for old money entertaining? $15 million and up. Annual property taxes in the Hamptons average $40,000 to $80,000 for properties in this range. Staffing a house for summer occupancy, a caretaker, a housekeeper, perhaps a cook, adds another $80,000 to $150,000 per year. The total annual cost of maintaining both a primary residence and a secondary property appropriate to the old money aesthetic. In the American context, you're looking at $300,000 to $700,000 per year in pure carrying costs, before you've spent a single dollar on food, clothing, or anything else. Education, the most invisible and most expensive investment. Here is where the old money lifestyle becomes something far more than aesthetic. Education, in the old money world, is not about learning. It is about belonging, and the cost of belonging to the right educational institutions is staggering. The pipeline begins almost at birth. In New York, families who aspire to old money status begin applying to private nursery schools when their children are still in the womb, sometimes literally. The waiting list for schools like the Dalton School, the Brearley School, or Collegiate are so long that parents add their names before their children are born. Annual tuition at these schools, $55,000 to $60,000 per year for nursery school. From there, the path leads to boarding school. In the United States, the most prestigious are what's known as the Ivy Prep schools: Phillips Exeter, Phillips Andover, Choate, Groton, St. Paul's, and a handful of others. Annual tuition plus room and board at these schools runs $65,000 to $75,000 per year. 4 years of boarding school, $260,000 to $300,000. In the United Kingdom, the equivalent institutions, Eton, Harrow, Winchester, Rugby, charge £45,000 to £50,000 per year in fees. Combined with the often expected extras, music lessons, sports equipment, uniforms, school trips, the real annual cost can exceed £55,000. These numbers are enormous, but the cost of not attending, in old money social terms, can be even higher, because the primary product of these schools is not education in the academic sense. It is the social network. The connections formed at Exeter or Groton are connections that last a lifetime, and that open doors in banking, law, politics, and business that are effectively closed to people who weren't there. This is what Bourdieu meant by social capital as a form of investment. Then comes university. Tuition at Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, the triumvirate of old money American higher education, is currently around $60,000 per year. Room, board, and incidentals bring the all-in cost to approximately $80,000 to $85,000 annually. 4 years, $320,000 to $340,000. This is after the boarding school investment. But even the cost of tuition understates the real investment. Getting into these schools requires years of preparation. Private tutors, $150 to $500 per hour. SAT prep courses, $2,000 to $8,000. College counselors, $5,000 to $30,000. Leadership programs, summer internships, gap year experiences, all of it designed to produce an application that reads like the child of someone who has always known exactly where they are going. The total educational investment from nursery school through an Ivy League degree, in a realistic scenario including all extras, you are looking at $700,000 to $1.2 million per child. And in the old money world, you often have more than one child. Now, a critical question: does this investment pay off financially? The research is genuinely complex. Studies from economists Raj Chetty, John Friedman, and Emmanuel Saez at Harvard found that attending an elite university does significantly increase access to top-income careers, particularly in finance, law, and consulting. Children from the top 1% of income earners are 77 times more likely to attend an Ivy League school than children from the bottom 20%. The old boy network is real, statistically measurable, and economically consequential. But, and this is crucial, the research also shows that much of the earnings premium attributed to elite schools disappears when you control for family background. In other words, it's not just the school, it's the family's network, wealth, and social capital that the school activates. A middle-class student who manages to get into Harvard does well. A legacy student from a connected family does even better, because they arrive with pre-existing social capital that the school then amplifies. For someone without the background, paying $1 million in educational costs to simulate the old money educational pipeline is an enormous gamble on an outcome that is far from guaranteed. Clubs, charities, and social infrastructure. We've talked about clothes, addresses, and education. Now we arrive at the social infrastructure, the invisible architecture of clubs, memberships, and philanthropic obligations that define old money life. And this is where many people, even those who've done everything else right, fall short. Let's start with clubs. The private club is one of the oldest and most powerful social institutions of the wealthy world. And in old money culture, club membership is not optional. It is in many ways the central organizing institution of social life. In the United States, the most prestigious are institutions like the Knickerbocker Club in New York, founded 1871, the Somerset Club in Boston, 1851, the Philadelphia Club, 1834, and the Metropolitan Club in Washington, D.C. Initiation fees for these clubs range from $10,000 to $75,000. Annual dues run $5,000 to $20,000. And, critically, you cannot simply apply and pay. You must be proposed by existing members and seconded by others. In some clubs, a single blackball from any member is sufficient to block your admission. Country clubs add another layer. A membership at a top-tier American country club, Augusta National, Winged Foot, Shinnecock Hills, Pine Valley, is either impossible to buy, Augusta has no public application process whatsoever, or carries a price tag of $150,000 to $350,000 in initiation fees, plus annual dues of $15,000 to $40,000. In the United Kingdom, the equivalent institutions are the London clubs. White's, the oldest and most exclusive, founded 1693. Brooks's, Boodle's, the Garrick, the Athenaeum. Initiation fees and annual dues are lower than their American counterparts, often £2,000 to £5,000 per year, but the waiting lists are measured in decades, not years. White's Club has a waiting list of approximately 10 years, and again, you must be proposed. Beyond clubs, old money social life revolves around philanthropy. Charitable giving in the old money world is not purely altruistic. It is also one of the primary mechanisms by which social status is displayed, relationships are built, and institutional access is secured. The right charitable boards and the right galas are where deals are made, where children are introduced to future spouses, and where the next generation's social position is established. A meaningful charitable donation in the New York context, the kind that gets your name on a wall, that earns a seat on a museum board, that establishes you as a serious player, starts at $100,000 and quickly scales into the millions. Many of the great New York cultural institutions, the Metropolitan Museum, the New York Philharmonic, Lincoln Center, have tiered giving programs that begin at $25,000 for the most basic recognition and rise to $1 million or more for genuine access and influence. The social expectation to attend galas and charity events carries its own costs. Tickets, $1,000 to $10,000 per seat, appropriate clothing for the event, and table purchases. A table at a major gala typically runs $50,000 to $250,000. Annual charitable giving appropriate to a serious old money social position in a major city. Realistic estimates from wealth management advisors put this at 3% to 10% of net worth per year for families genuinely embedded in this world. For a family with $20 million in assets, that's $600,000 to $2 million per year, much of it directed not just by generosity, but by social obligation. The psychological cost, the weight, nobody talks about. We've spent most of this video talking about money. Now let's talk about something that costs even more, and that very few financial discussions ever touch: the psychological cost of maintaining an image you weren't born into. Psychologists have a term for the experience of feeling like a fraud despite external success: imposter syndrome. It was first described in 1978 by psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, who observed it most commonly in high-achieving women. But subsequent research has shown it to be far more widespread, cutting across gender, profession, and socioeconomic class. In the old money performance specifically, imposter syndrome takes a particularly acute form, because old money is not just about having things. It's about being fluent in an entire cultural language, one that was absorbed by genuine old money families over generations, through thousands of small social interactions, corrections, observations, and experiences. Dr. Karen Lahiri, a clinical psychologist who has written about wealth and identity, has described what she calls class anxiety, a persistent, low-grade psychological distress experienced by people who feel they are performing a social class rather than inhabiting it. This anxiety is characterized by hypervigilance about social cues, fear of exposure, and a persistent sense that the performance might collapse at any moment. The cognitive load of this performance is immense. Keeping track of which fork to use is the trivial version. The real burden is maintaining constant awareness of how you speak, vocabulary, accent, speech patterns, how you refer to money. Old money almost never discusses specific amounts. What opinions you express on art, literature, and current events. Which cultural institutions you claim membership in, and how casually you navigate spaces, restaurants, hotels, social events that would intimidate someone unfamiliar with them. And the social consequences of getting it wrong can be swift and brutal. Sociologist Seamus Khan spent years studying St. Paul's, one of America's elite boarding schools, and wrote about it in his 2011 book, Privilege. He observed that elite students were taught to appear comfortable with their privilege, to wear it lightly, to seem effortless. Students who tried too hard, who were too eager, too grateful, too obviously impressed, were marked as outsiders. The performance of ease was, paradoxically, something that required enormous effort to perfect. For adults navigating this world, the stakes are even higher, and the feedback is less forgiving. There's also the financial anxiety that runs beneath the surface of the aesthetic. People who are spending at the upper limit of their means, or beyond it, to maintain an old money image live with a constant quiet dread. Research by financial therapist Brad Klontz and his colleagues has documented what they call financial trauma in high earners who overspend on status, a cycle in which the anxiety of overspending drives further spending as a way of reassuring oneself that everything is fine. The Atlantic writer Joe Pinsker, in his research on aspirational spending, found that people who spend significantly on status are frequently less happy than either genuinely wealthy people or people who have made peace with more modest means. The in-between space, trying to appear wealthier than you are, is psychologically the most costly of all, and there is a loneliness to it. The performances required in old money social settings can make genuine connection difficult. When you are managing an image, you are never fully present. Every conversation contains a secondary conversation, an internal monitoring of how you are being perceived. This is exhausting, and it is isolating. The opportunity cost, what you give up. We've talked about what the old money image costs. Now let's talk about what it costs you instead, the opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is one of the most powerful concepts in economics. Every dollar you spend is a dollar you didn't invest. Every dollar invested at 7% annual return doubles approximately every 10 years. This is not abstract. It is the mathematical engine of genuine wealth creation. Consider this scenario. A 35-year-old earns $400,000 per year, top 1% of American earners. After taxes, they take home roughly $240,000. Now watch what happens when they allocate that income in two different ways. Path A, the old money aspiration. They spend $80,000 on housing costs, $40,000 on a wardrobe, $25,000 on club memberships, $50,000 on charitable giving, $20,000 on private school for one child, and $25,000 on miscellaneous image maintenance. That's $240,000. They save nothing. They invest nothing. Path B, the stealth wealth builder. They spend $40,000 on a comfortable but modest home, $5,000 on clothing, well chosen, not performative. Skip the clubs, give $10,000 to charity, send their child to a strong public school, and invest $185,000 per year. After 20 years, at a 7% average annual return, Path B has accumulated approximately $7.6 million in investable assets. Path A has accumulated approximately zero, and may, in fact, have taken on debt to sustain the image. The genuine old money families understood this. The greatest fortunes of the Gilded Age were not maintained by consumption. They were maintained by investment. The Rockefeller family's wealth, which John D. Rockefeller built in the late 19th century, has lasted and grown for 5 generations, specifically because each generation was taught to invest far more than they spent. In fact, many of the most iconic old money families lived, and continue to live, with a frugality that would shock people who only see the external image. Warren Buffett is the most famous modern example, genuinely one of the world's wealthiest people, living in a house he bought in 1958 for $31,500, driving himself to work, eating at McDonald's. His wealth has endured, not despite this frugality, but because of it. The Vanderbilt family provides the cautionary counterexample. William Henry Vanderbilt inherited the largest personal fortune in American history when his father Cornelius died in 1877, approximately $100 million, equivalent to several billion in today's dollars. Within 2 generations, through spectacular and competitive consumption, each family branch trying to outdo the others in mansions, yachts, and entertainments. The fortune was largely dissipated. By the time the family held a reunion at Vanderbilt University in the 1970s, there was reportedly not a single millionaire among the 120 descendants who attended. This is not an unusual story. The research on multi-generational wealth retention is sobering. A frequently cited study by wealth advisors, Williams and Pricer, found that 70% of family wealth is dissipated by the end of the second generation, and 90% by the end of the third. The causes are almost always behavioral: spending habits, failure to invest, and the cost of maintaining lifestyles built on the previous generation's peak earning. The image, in other words, outlasts the money. Who is actually doing this and why? So who exactly is driving the current obsession with the old money aesthetic? And why now? The data is illuminating. A 2023 report by the luxury research firm Bain & Company found that the market for what they term accessible luxury, products that signal wealth without requiring actual wealth, grew by 22% in 2022, outpacing both true luxury and mainstream markets. This category includes brands like Coach, Michael Kors, and certain product lines from Ralph Lauren and Burberry, not the top of those brands, but the parts marketed to aspirational buyers. The quiet luxury trend that exploded on TikTok in 2022 and 2023 generated over 2.3 billion views on the platform. Searches for Loro Piana, Brunello Cucinelli, and The Row, brands associated with the old money aesthetic, increased by 300% to 500% in 2022 and 2023 on resale platforms like The Real Real. Who is doing the searching? Research by the consumer analytics firm Edited found that the primary drivers of the quiet luxury trend were millennials and Gen Z with household incomes between $75,000 and $150,000. Decidedly not old money income, who were using clothing and accessories to signal a class position they aspired to. The psychological research on this is fascinating and a little uncomfortable. Studies on luxury consumption motivation consistently find that the primary driver of aspirational luxury spending is not enjoyment of the product. It's a desire for social recognition and a hedge against social anxiety. People spend on luxury items not primarily because those items bring joy, but because they fear the social consequences of not having them. This is what economists call positional spending, spending designed to maintain or improve your position in a social hierarchy. And the research is consistent. Positional spending brings significantly less happiness than experiential spending or pro-social spending, spending on others. You adapt quickly to a new handbag. You rarely adapt fully to the memory of a meaningful trip or the satisfaction of helping someone else. The current trend is also deeply intertwined with social media. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok have made social comparison constant, immediate, and global. Previous generations compared themselves to their neighbors and colleagues. Today, young people compare themselves to curated, filtered, carefully staged representations of a global aspirational class. The reference point has shifted radically upward, and spending behavior has followed. The result is what some economists call a treadmill effect. People work harder, earn more, and spend more in pursuit of status, only to find that the reference point keeps moving. The old money image, precisely because it is so subtle and so knowledge-intensive, is particularly prone to this effect. You can always suspect that you're not quite there yet, that there's another layer of authenticity you haven't achieved. The alternative, what actually works? So what's the alternative? If the old money image is so expensive and so psychologically costly, what should you actually do? Let's talk about what real financial security, the kind that doesn't depend on performance, actually looks like. The first principle is the one the old money families actually followed before the consumption competition got out of hand. Invest far more than you spend. The research on this is clear and consistent. The millionaire next door phenomenon, documented by Thomas Stanley and William Danko in their landmark 1996 book, found that the majority of genuinely wealthy Americans lived in modest homes, drove ordinary cars, and avoided conspicuous consumption. They built wealth through sustained investment and frugality, not through income or performance. The second principle is to distinguish between intrinsic quality and social signaling. These are not the same thing. Buying well-made clothes that fit properly and last long? That's a genuine investment in quality and comfort. Buying the specific brands associated with old money in order to be recognized by a certain social group? That's social signaling, and it costs 10 times as much for a fraction of the genuine satisfaction. There is real pleasure in high quality, in a coat that keeps you warm, in a shoe that fits your foot perfectly, in a meal that's been prepared with genuine skill and care. None of that pleasure requires a specific label or a specific address, and the research on happiness and consumption consistently finds that the quality of the experience matters far more than the brand or the status signal. The third principle is social investment over social performance. The genuine value of the old money social world, the deep, lasting relationships, the intellectual engagement, the sense of community, is accessible without the price tag if you invest in building real relationships rather than performing membership in a social class. Relationships built on genuine connection, shared values, and mutual respect are both more satisfying and more durable than relationships built on performance of status, and they don't require a club initiation fee. The fourth principle is radical financial honesty. One of the most damaging aspects of the old money performance is the cultural prohibition on discussing money. In genuine old money culture, discussing specific amounts is considered vulgar, but this norm has been imported by aspiring old money participants in a particularly destructive way. They don't discuss money because they don't want to confront how much the performance is costing them. Financial therapists and advisors consistently report that their highest-earning clients who are least financially secure are those who have spent years avoiding hard conversations with themselves about their spending. The math, when finally confronted, is almost always worse than they imagined. Getting a clear-eyed, honest picture of your own financial situation, income, spending, debt, net worth, is the beginning of real financial security, not the performance of it, the thing itself, the real cost, restated. Let's add it all up. A wardrobe appropriate to the old money aesthetic, built from scratch, $50,000 to $150,000, plus $4,000 to $8,000 per year in maintenance. A primary residence in an appropriate neighborhood, $3 million to $10 million, with annual carrying costs of $100,000 to $300,000. A secondary property, $3 million to $15 million, with annual carrying costs of $100,000 to $250,000. Education per child from nursery school through university, $700,000 to to $1.2 million. Club memberships, $50,000 to $350,000 in initiation fees, plus $15,000 to $60,000 per year in dues. Charitable giving at a socially meaningful level, $100,000 to $2 million per year. And over all of this, the invisible costs, the psychological weight of the performance, the opportunity cost of money not invested, the relationships not built, the authentic life not lived. The total? Over a lifetime, maintaining a convincing old money image for someone who was not born into it costs, conservatively, $10 million to $30 million. And that's just the financial dimension. Here is the deepest irony of the entire enterprise. The families who are actually old money, the ones whose names are on the buildings, whose portraits hang in the clubs, whose children have been going to the same schools for 6 generations. Many of them are quietly, diligently, almost invisibly investing. They are not spending on the performance because they don't need to perform. The performance is who they are, and precisely because they are not spending on it, the money continues to compound. The people who are spending the most to look like old money are, by doing so, guaranteeing that they will never be old money. Because real generational wealth is not built through consumption. It is built through the patient, disciplined, decades-long work of investing more than you spend, which is the exact opposite of what the old money image demands of its aspiring performers. There is a version of this story that ends well. It is the version in which you take the money you would have spent performing a class you weren't born into, invest it consistently for 20 or 30 years, and give the next generation something genuinely valuable. Not a wardrobe or an address or a club membership, but a paid-off home, a growing portfolio, and the freedom to build their own lives without the weight of performance. That's not a particularly glamorous story. It won't go viral on TikTok. Nobody's making a Netflix series about it, but it is the story of how real wealth actually works. And that, in the end, is the most important thing to understand about the hidden cost of the old money image. The people who are truly wealthy aren't paying it.